Hello, you fighting game fanatics. You're listening to the Twilight Hadoukens with FGF Chris. And today's topic is 100% opinion based. This is just my personal opinion of what the top 5 favorite fighting games of mine are, as well as the top 5 worst fighting games of mine, in my opinion at least. So what we're going to do is, I have a quarter here. Hear that? That's my quarter. And I'm going to flip it. If it lands on heads, I'm going to start off with the 5 best fighting games and end on the 5 worst fighting games. If it lands tails, I'll be doing the worst first and the best for last. So here it goes. Let's flip it. It is heads. So we're going to do the really good fighting games before we talk about the shitty, terrible, poor excuses for fighting games that exist. And on this show, I think it's fair if I give a long explanation why I think each game is the best or each game is the worst. So I will give you my personal thoughts and insights to the best and the worst of fighting games. So here it goes. With the best, at number 5, I would say Tekken 5. It was a game that was released on the PS2 back in the early 2000s, and it was created by a company called Namco. You might know them for games like Soul Calibur and Pac-Man, and Ridge Racer and all that jazz. And Tekken 5 was really, really groundbreaking. It did a lot of things that fighting games back then didn't do, and it was a 3D fighting game. One of the most appealing parts about Tekken 5 has to be the intro and presentation of the game. It looked really clean, the art style was beautiful, the music was sublime, and they had the best console opening ever for the PS2. And I believe they used the same one in their arcades as well. And it was played to like really heavy metal music, and it was just incredible. Like, the opening is a total of about 5 minutes long. You get to see all your characters do their poses and fight and show their conflicts or whatever, and it was really, really well done. Not only that, it was one of the very first 3D fighting games. It probably was not the first, but it was one of the ones that had a really intensive customization option for the characters, where you could change their clothes, their looks, the color scheme of the clothes that they're wearing. And that was really, really well done. And it was basically put together on a very high level of variety for the customization options. Not only that, the fighting was really good. The graphics were cleaned up, like the CGI was just pal right there. It was good. Plus, the character roster was really, really healthy in it. They had a lot of characters, a lot of unlockable characters, surprisingly. And, 2 of my mains that I still use in the modern Tekken games, like Tekken 6 and Tekken 7, Asuka Kazama and Lee Chaolon, are in Tekken 5, and they play freaking beautifully. So yeah, Tekken 5 is definitely up there. They try to do something different with the customization and the presentation, and they freaking nailed it. At number 4, I had a really hard time choosing between 2 great games. And I felt like because they were both a part of the same company, it would be only fair if I pick one and discard the other. And those 2 games came out by Arc System Works, and they are BlazBlue Central Fiction and Guilty Gear Xrd Rev 2. And after much deliberation, I have decided that I will talk about BlazBlue Central Fiction because that game had a sheer amount of fan service, gameplay, even like minor RPG elements thrown into it. And and like I said before, fan service. This game has a crap ton of fan service. And when you're playing the game, it is almost like you're watching a Japanese anime. And I that is not an understatement. That is a real deal. It is very anime based. Everything looks like a fantasy anime fictional universe where it has like elements of shonen and harem styles of anime, and even a little bit of ecchi too. Now, for those who don't know what three words I just said, basically they're Japanese terminology for different styles of anime story and plot and concept and genre. Shonen anime is basically anime that is catered to the teenage boy demographic. And shonen anime is very, very action packed. Basically, like any teenage boy would like it because there's a lot of violence and action. It's pretty cool. With harem anime is kind of like a boy with a lot of girls surrounding that boy. And there's a lot of emphasis on female characters and how they interact with the world. It's kind of interesting. And the last one I said was ecchi. And ecchi is basically, to say it lightly, it's like softcore porn, or basically like fan service that is kind of sexually appealing. Now, it isn't like full on nudity or anything, or too sexualized, but there are sexual undertones in it. And BlazBlue, that video game, that fighting game, had a lot of those three elements thrown into the fighting game universe of BlazBlue. And it is kind of neat. Like, it makes you feel like you're watching an anime and playing a video game. Plus, one really awesome quality about BlazBlue and its gameplay is every single character in Central Fiction or any of the BlazBlue games plays entirely different from one another. No character plays identical to another character. You know, you don't have Shotos like Ken, Ryu, Akuma, Goken, Sakura. Basically, those five characters do the same exact thing in the Street Fighter universe, but in BlazBlue, every single person is completely different on an independent level. And that is a really appealing thing about BlazBlue. At number 3, I have to give props to Capcom's awesomeness. Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Now, you're probably wondering, why am I not including Street Fighter 2 in this segment as one of my favorite or best games, best fighting games? Well, with Street Fighter 2, even though it was the most innovative fighting game ever, that basically paved way for the genre, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike basically perfected what Street Fighter 2 set out to be. And not only is the graphics great and the storyline great, and the animation was superb, but it was the most balanced fighting game of its generation. It was incredibly balanced. And for those who don't know what balancing is in fighting games, basically, a balanced fighting game is a game that all the characters can fight each other on the same skill level. Tiers are very minimized. Basically, like any character that you pick up and play in a certain balanced game, you know that the opponent that you're fighting against is on an equal playing field as you. Now, there's a lot of games out there that are imbalanced. Basically, you'll have a really weak character and a very overpowered character to destroy that weak character. But in Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, you don't really have that, because every character is decent and good at fighting. And it paved way for many great iconic characters like Ibuki, Makoto, Sean, Oro. There was a lot of new characters that no one has ever seen in a Street Fighter game. You know, a lot of original characters. The only returning characters from the Street Fighter 2 days would be Ken, Ryu, Chun-Li, and Akuma. Everyone else was kind of like just brand new and different, and it was something to embrace, really. And Street Fighter 3 Third Strike is very, very awesome in tournaments because of how balanced it is. In fact, there was a tournament player named Daigo who basically did the most craziest moment in fighting game history at a tournament. He managed to use Ken against Chun-Li and parried every single attack that Chun-Li was doing with her rapid kicks with one teeny pixel of health left, and he parried all of that. So Chun-Li didn't do any damage to Ken, Daigo's Ken, and Ken ended up winning. Daigo ended up winning first place there, and it was just a really incredible moment. So Street Fighter 3 is freaking awesome. At number 2, we have a very obscure game that not too many people have ever heard of, and it was released on a system that inevitably failed, an handheld system. And that game is SNK vs. Capcom Match of the Millennium. It came out for the Neo Geo Pocket Color back in 1999. And it's very, very, very obscure. But I had some of the best memories of that game. It is incredible. There's so much packed into this tiny handheld game with an LED screen that's not backlit. And it is an incredible game. Basically, it is the first SNK versus Capcom crossover that has ever existed. And now, I said SNK versus Capcom, not Capcom versus SNK. This is SNK's take on the crossover franchise. So it is a really ambitious, bold move by SNK to create a handheld with Capcom characters also in it. And it is just packed. A very interesting storyline. Olympic mode where you basically could do these mini games to unlock certain master skills for each character. And I'll tell you what, you have to grind like crazy in the game to get every single feature unlocked. There are 8 unlockable characters. And then there's the master skills that you get that you have to earn Olympic points to buy them. And basically it gives an extra super special move for every single character in the game, with a roster of 26 characters. It is incredible, and everything is drawn in a very chibi-looking way. Everything looks like little kids, or little deformed midgets, or whatever. And it is incredible. The fan service is great. The cutscenes, the gameplay, it is spot on. And I spent well over 100 hours into it. Yeah. SNK versus Capcom Match of the Millennium. That's the good shit right there. And finally, at number 1 of my most favorite fighting games, King of Fighters 98 Ultimate Match. This game was incredible. And it is very nostalgic, and the reason why I chose this one instead of 2002 Unlimited Match was because King of Fighters 98 Ultimate Match was super nostalgic for me because of the fact that King of Fighters 98 was the first King of Fighters game that I have ever played in my life. And that's no joke. That is true. I remember my teen years, I played King of Fighters 98, and I was hooked. I was like, oh my god, there's a roster of over 30 characters in this game, and it is just crazy with the sheer amount of abilities and techniques that these characters can throw and do. And it made me obsessed with the King of Fighters genre. Now, it's true, when I was a little kid, I used to play like Samurai Showdown and stuff, so I was a little bit acquainted with SNK fighting games. But King of Fighters 98 Ultimate Match basically took everything that was good about King of Fighters 98 and made it better. It included more characters, really spruced up the presentation, gave like a CGI background to it, so you could like see a little bit of an updated graphic with the backgrounds, and it was just really well done. Now, it isn't the most balanced game, like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. It was not nearly as balanced as that, but it was a damn fun time playing King of Fighters. King of Fighters 98 Ultimate Match. Oh my god. And I used to use a hell out of like Iori Yagami, Mai Shiranui, Terry Bogard. I'd always choose red characters in the game too. Every character of red clothing is what I play as. It's fun stuff. And yeah, most nostalgic and fun I have ever had was with KOF 98 UM. So that does it for the favorite fighting games of all time, the top 5 of that. And now we're going to move on to the shitty, worst fighting games of all time. At number 5 of the most worst, crappy-ass fighting games of all time, I would say that Guilty Gear Azuka was pretty bad. Now, it isn't a terrible fighting game. In fact, there's many that like it. But Guilty Gear Azuka, that title, was not that good. It was not a really shitty game, but it wasn't great either. They tried to do something very different with that game. Like, they wanted to make a side-scrolling beat-em-up out of Guilty Gear Azuka in a certain mode. And also, they wanted to have the ability that 4 people could play on the screen at one time. And that was a train wreck, an absolute train wreck. Having basically 4 characters fighting on what is supposed to be a 2D fighting game plane. Now, if you played Super Smash Bros., you could see that, hey, it does work. You can play as 4 characters on the screen at once, but it was a 3D game. It was like they had 3 dimensions to it, and they basically had a certain gameplay system that worked with it. It was still a little bit like on a 2D plane, but they made the system not like a traditional fighting game system. That's why, Super Smash was so successful. But with Guilty Gear Azuka, they tried to do the same thing, and it was just an awful clusterfuck of disappointment. So that's Guilty Gear Azuka. And number 4, there was a little game that came out for the PS2. And it was just a very disappointing game when it came to graphics and presentation and story even and plot. It was a game called Capcom Fighting Evolution. And I'd like to call that Crapcom Fighting Evolution. It was really bad. Okay. Here's a terminology for you fighting game fans out there that don't know what this word means. But there is a style of game that you can create or edit and be like basically design a system for. And it is called Mugen. Mugen is basically an ultimate dream match of fighting games that were very similar to SNK and Capcom style and Mortal Kombat style or, whatever. Basically, you could take pixelated graphics of characters and basically have them fight in any dream match that you ever wanted. You could have, Ryu fight Scorpion from Mortal Kombat. You could have Terry Bogard from SNK fight, My Little Pony character. The possibilities with Mugen were limitless because you could basically create a fighting game with pre-existing images. And that's exactly what Capcom Fighting Evolution was. It was basically, hey, let's be very lazy and copy and paste all these Street Fighter, all these Darkstalkers, Red Earth characters, and we're going to copy and paste them all in a video game. And, we're going to just doodle on the backgrounds. We're going to, like, do everything very half-assed and not appealing. And that's what it was. It was basically a real company's Mugen. That's all it was. And there was nothing original about it. There was nothing appealing about it. The only original aspect to Capcom Fighting Evolution was they brought a original character in called Indrid. And she was a cute character, but, she had, like, no place into that universe, though. So, yeah, avoid that game at all cost. It's pretty bad. At number 3, Street Fighter the Movie. Yes, Street Fighter the Movie, a game that came out, I believe it came out for the Sega Saturn system back in the mid-90s. If you guys remember back in the 90s, there was a movie that starred Jean-Claude Van Damme and Raul Julia. They both played Guile and Bison from Street Fighter. And the movie was Street Fighter. So they decided, hey, wouldn't it be a great idea to make this movie a video game? Even though Street Fighter 2 and all those games already did that. And basically is a way that American companies could get a little bit more money. They're thinking, oh, this movie was successful with stupid people, so how about we create a fighting game based on the movie? And it was awful. It was like a poorly made Mortal Kombat style fighting game, okay? Basically, it had actors that were like turned into pixelated forms, like in Mortal Kombat, and it was just bad. It was choppy, like very choppy animation, had no real good storyline to it, and it seemed fake as shit. It was awful. At number 2, we have Karnov's Revenge. Now, a little backstory. With Street Fighter's success back in the early 1990s, there was a lot of game companies that wanted to imitate that success and basically created like Street Fighter clones or games that played very similar to Street Fighter. Karnov's Revenge was almost like a copy and paste game of Street Fighter. Now there were a few original characters in it, but it was just basically, you had your Shotos, you had your flamboyant Spanish guy, you had your giant muscle-bound Muay Thai fighter, you had all of them. You had a pretty little Asian lady, a Chinese lady that looks like Chun-Li in it. Karnov Revenge was kind of a very laughable game because there was a game that came out for the NES back in the late 80s, early 90s called Karnov. And it was created by a company called Data East. And Data East is the same company that made Karnov's Revenge. Now, a little backstory with Karnov. It was a side-scrolling adventure game where you played as this Mongolian-looking guy named Karnov. And he goes around shooting fireballs out of his mouths at things that looked like ancient Greek-type monsters and crap. And they decided, hey, how about we turn Karnov, our most successful franchise, which was not very successful, with players and all that. But they're like, hey, let's turn it into a fighting game. And they made a fighting game, and it's crappy. There's nothing to it. It's a lackluster. It was an excuse to use their intellectual property in a fighting game to try to salvage their company, I guess. And it was pretty disappointing. Data East sucks. They made some good games back in the day, but it was a hit or miss, really. Okay, at number 1 with the shittiest game of all time, drumroll, it goes to Shaq Fu. Shaq Fu. Now, it's kind of like a guilty pleasure for some because they're like, oh my god, there's a fighting game with Shaquille O'Neal in it. Well, with others, it's a disappointing train wreck. In my opinion, I hate Shaq Fu. It's annoying. It's like, hey, how about we make some money by having Shaquille O'Neal, a basketball star, enter the world of a kung fu tournament when they're doing a charity game in China? That is the plot. That is the plot of the game. Shaquille O'Neal was in China to do charity work, and he gets summoned by this mysterious old man that says, hey, you're a famous basketball guy, but we want you to fight in a tournament against monsters. The premise, the plot, the story was fucking bogus. It was awful. Plus, not only that, the game was downright difficult. Even if you put the game on the lowest difficulty setting, fighting these guys with your, like, really crappy animation, your basketball skills, and crap like that, it's just a lacklusting pain in the ass. It is... I can't even find the words to describe Shaq Fu. The graphics, the animation were very glitchy. Pulling off the moves were really difficult. The characters that you fight against or could choose in the game are like copy and paste like old school 1900s, early 1900s like movie monsters, like Dracula or Frankenstein. You know, basically a bunch of weird characters in this game. And I highly recommend that you avoid it at all cost. So anyway, I better wrap it up. That is my top 5 favorite fighting games and my top 5 least favorite fighting games. You guys take care and keep listening to my stuff. Later.